Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Louis Yakumi from L Connect, although many of you might know me from the past 25 years when I was at Automotive Logistics Group. I'm very happy and honored to present this and host this webinar about inbound logistics, about the evolution and adaptation to automotive inbound logistics with two great speakers from Nissan and from Venture Global Solutions. You'll be able to ask questions, but to ask questions, you'll have to use the chat box at the bottom of your screen on Teams. So please feel free to ask questions anytime, but we'll be doing the Q&A at the end of the presentation. But you can add questions or make comments anytime during the whole webinar. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to our two speakers for today. Ben Jarnagin, who's a manager of parts logistics and USMCA at Nissan North America, and to Jacob Ogden, the director of engineering for Venture Global Solutions. Over to you, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you, Louis. Just quick introduction of myself and kind of the relationship between Nissan and Venture Global Solutions. And I believe Jacob's going to get into some content, but as you mentioned, so I manage our strategy team for inbound parts logistics for essentially North America for Nissan's business. When I came into the role, which was back in 2019, noticed a lot of opportunity for some of the ways we were managing our logistics, and we were fortunate to get in contact with Venture Global Solutions. Jacob has been a big part of the business ever since, helping address some of our opportunities with flexibility and variability in demand, new model launches, a lot of the things that exist in automotive. So they've been a big partner in our cross-dock network and helping to address some of those challenges. So Jacob, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right, thanks, Ben. Thanks, Louis. As mentioned, I'm Jacob Ogden, Director of Engineering with Venture Global Solutions. Been with the group for 6 years now, and as Ben mentioned, we've been working together with Nissan for the last 2 years, particularly focused on inbound automotive on the cross-dock side and consolidation side, and helping them reduce their costs and manage all of the changes that have been going on in the automotive industry and environment. So I'll go ahead and get started here and walk through kind of what we've seen over the last 2 years and the future and what we're looking to adapt to. So just a quick table of contents, we'll walk through just the evolution of the inbound automotive network and what we've seen and some of the results and benefits that we've seen throughout that. Obviously, as everyone's aware of the challenges impacting the industry now from COVID to the microchip shortages and some of the challenges that we're seeing today and how this evolution and adaptation has helped improve that, and then kind of what the network design plays into that and how network engineering and network design is a key to that the success of this network. So from a quick high-level standpoint, most people on the call are probably aware of a cross-dock and the importance of it from a high level with multiple plants and in complexity in the network. When we have multiple vehicles, multiple models, it's important to be able to consolidate freight into cross-docks and to ship that freight out onto dedicated trucks. Instead of having pickups at one supplier delivering to every individual plant, we're able to consolidate freight from suppliers into a cross-dock facility and ship that out to the dedicated plants. But within that, there's also a lot of other added benefits. Some of the stuff, especially more recently, that we've noticed is supplier constraints with hours. A lot of suppliers are cutting their shifts and productions on second shift and third shift. So hours now being only, let's say, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. are much more difficult when you're running long-haul milk run routes from plants to suppliers in order to pick up that freight. So we've been able to help suppliers out from that standpoint as well, because they can mitigate the number of pickups at their docks, with some of the smaller suppliers only having limited dock space and floor space. Some additional benefits is reduction of resources from a tractor, trailer, and driver standpoint. Being able to slip seat tractors by picking up freight during the day on a consolidation route and running your line hauls at night is an opportunity for reduction of tractors and trailers and getting better utilization out of those, as well as drivers being paired up on multiple routes. So able to run 2 short collection routes instead of trying to run a long haul route and then having to use sleeper cabs and not being able to use day cabs. And those are some of the kind of different benefits that we're seeing from the cross docks aside from the pure consolidation of freight. We know that there's improved cube utilization, improved loading of freight when you can load at a cross dock, and there's also other benefits from the carrier side as well. So just to kind of highlight previous state versus kind of the new, what we call the hub and spoke replication network. So previous state was a lot of direct deliveries, long haul truckload routes, multi-stops, a lot of relay points throughout the network, and a lot of unsecure yards as well. So with relays, the carriers are typically holding the freight in their yards or other unsecure lots, which also causes dwell time on both packaging and freight. So we have a lot of, unknowns, I guess, in the network, because you have freight and packaging sitting in trailers across, the country with all the multiple relay points. You also have a higher risk of hours of service issues with weather delays, with traffic delays. When you're running, 1,000-mile routes, there's a higher risk of either missing the relay point because you have drivers meeting up on different times and getting delayed in traffic. So you have a risk of expedite costs as a result of that. As I mentioned, the visibility on that as well. So some of the pros with the consolidation network and the hub and spoke network, as I mentioned already, is driver-friendly routes. So less than 500, 550 miles, and the drivers are home daily. With the market now and a driver shortage, being able to have drivers that can get home every single day and be with their families is extremely important now more than ever. As I mentioned, with increased asset utilization, being able to utilize those tractors 24 hours a day instead of just running route, having drivers take their tractors home or having them at relay points, we're able to keep those tractors in one domicile, and we're able to utilize those tractors, whether it's for the same business or different business, but we can pair up routes from other customers on days and nights. The separation in causing less congestion at the manufacturer, so we can load specifically those trailers outbound to the specific dock. That way there's not an unload and moving of freight internal to our customers. They're not having at the plant, they're not having to move freight around from dock A to dock Y because the freight is all mixed from one supplier. So we're able to specify which docks go on which trailers, and then really early detection of supplier errors. When a supplier short ships or they ship damaged parts, we're the first line of defense at that cross dock, because you're able to see quickly if there was a OS&D, whether it was damaged or if it was short shipped, and then notify the plant, so we can make decisions that can protect the plant further upstream than waiting until the delivery at the plant. And then also any charges that we do have with that freight handling gets offset by lower reduced cost per mile, and that's based on having those driver-friendly routes. So in the utilization, so carriers are more willing to provide cost reductions when they're able to reduce their costs. They pass those on to the customer, so we see cost per mile reductions, even though we're adding maybe some costs on the handling side.
Yeah, and to further Jacob's point, he made a couple of really good points on this slide that I want to key in on, that we've seen the benefit on specifically at Nissan. So one of the things, cross-docking is not something new. It's been around for 80 plus years, and it's not necessarily that it's reinventing the wheel, but some of the things that maybe the market's taken some visibility off of, and the benefits that we've really been able to realize is, obviously those pickups are costly. Driver hours are more valuable than they've ever been. So when you're making a pickup, you don't want to pick up at the same supplier multiple times and then have them shipped to the separate plants. You're able to unify those pickups, make it once, separate it out by final destination, and obviously you get a ton of benefit there. Those are some of the more evident and obvious solutions, but Jacob mentioned something that I think is very important, and that's around kind of the first line of defense, and that's something that we didn't even really necessarily think on initially from a Nissan standpoint when we entered the partnership and kind of went into this cross-dock solution. So we've seen a lot of opportunity to, obviously the restacking and cube benefit, but finding non-compliant packaging and being able to trace that back and address it. Finding opportunities where we may have mixed pallets or non-optimal ordering quantities. Those are some of the benefits that may not show up on the surface when you think about obvious, cross-dock solutions, but things that I think have definitely been major benefits and feed all the way, directly for my scope of command when you think of transportation, but also to the handling at the plant. So definitely a huge benefit from this type of solution in early detection.
So just to kind of dive into one example of obviously many, but in the past, we had one Nashville cross dock that kind of was all of our southeast region. So included South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and all of our freight was consolidated into our Nashville cross dock. With that came some long transit routes, driving through the mountains, driving, from the southeast coast. When there's hurricanes, it's difficult because of weather to get out there. And a lot of these routes still required relays, even though we were going into a crossdock. So as I mentioned previously, the relays obviously could pose difficulties. So one of the changes we've made is to smaller centralized crossdocks, and they may not have as much freight as the Nashville crossdock, but they're smaller multi-customer facilities where we can consolidate and keep those miles under the 500-mile threshold, as I discussed before. So an example on the right, you can see Knoxville and South Carolina were implemented crossdocks in Greer and Knoxville in order to kind of consolidate at a closer point. So get that first point of receipt closer to the suppliers, just for those same benefits that I mentioned earlier, so we can detect any issues. And if there are any issues due to weather in the mountains or in the southeast, now we're able to dispatch drivers at a much closer range. We can actually hold freight if needed, pick up multiple days at one time and hold at those facilities. And it's really gotten to more regionalized instead of the large, Midwest crossdock. Now we have more regionalized crossdocks in the smaller regions in order to provide all those benefits as mentioned. So just to kind of talk in some of the results, I've hit on some of these points already, but cost savings is obviously one of the most important ones for any customer. So being able to reduce the freight charges from the carrier base is always an added benefit. And as I mentioned, if we're able to help the carrier reduce their costs by improving their utilization, then in turn, we can typically receive those reduced costs as well. It's given us an opportunity to look at dedicated models out of the crossdocks more. So you have dedicated drivers and tractors that are able to slip seat in the tractors and reduce their costs by only utilizing one or two tractors for both the collection routes and line hauls and pairing those together instead of having to have multiple tractors for both the line hauls and collection routes. Pulling ahead of freight, being able to have a certain amount of planned line hauls, but as freight volumes spike up and down from all the production changes day to day, the crossdocks are able to pull freight ahead or hold freight to the next day and cut line hauls in order to not ship a truck every single day. We're able to cut costs by reducing the number of total trucks that are actually running. Reduction of unplanned freight. The example on the right just kind of shows a diagram where typically on a milk run route, especially even with the long haul routes, suppliers won't stack freight on top of other suppliers' freight. It's a liability to them that they're not willing to do. So in the example of the crossdock, we're able to optimize those trucks by stacking like freight on top of each other, making sure it's secure. That's what the crossdock do on a day-to-day basis. So they're able to eliminate cube outs and provide cost reductions by optimizing the freight loading at the crossdock. Even with the unplanned freight, if you cube out on a 1,000-mile milk run, you have nowhere to ship the freight but direct to the plant. Whereas with the consolidation networks, we're able to have the supplier ship it to the closest crossdock, which may only be 25 miles away, and you'll have a significantly reduced cost on that expedite. And even with supplier issues, if a supplier is having some production issues, we're open to them delivering the freight to our dock instead of having to ship it direct to the plant. So it's a total network reduction of costs, not just our customers reducing their unplanned costs. It helps the suppliers out in reducing their unplanned costs, which in turn benefits everyone as we have the total network lowest cost possible. All parties are benefiting from not having that extra cost. Returnable container facility. Most customers will ship returnable containers as a garbage can directly to us, so we're able to sort the containers. It frees up space on site at the plants or at the manufacturing facilities, so they can focus on building the cars or building or manufacturing rather than trying to sort dunnage on site. It's not a big value add to have your manufacturing facility sorting containers. So this allows what I call garbage cans, just mixed container loads to be sent out and have our crossdock sort those containers and then ship those out to the correct suppliers. And then I've mentioned multiple times on the asset utilization. So we're able to domicile carriers directly out of our facility. So it reduces deadhead miles as well. So with their tractors being on site at our facilities, they're not having to drive from their terminal to the facility to pick up trailers. So they're able to reduce their out of route miles and deadhead miles and paired routes together.
Yeah, and again, from kind of the solution standpoint, and what have we seen, right? So you'll recall the slide Jacob talked about earlier, where it's kind of that traditional direct model versus the cross-dock model. And Jacob just hit on a very key point on the variable planning and kind of the cost of a cube out, and with the spot market where it's at, it's very costly right now, right? So I think it encourages you to be a lot more aggressive, where on a direct milk run, you may be, planning 50-60% utilization, right? I can get a lot more aggressive with a collection route on a cross dock and risk those blowouts for efficiency with order variability, because it is closer and it's a lot easier and more cost effective to recover. And then additionally, with that pooling of freight into line haul, so you've got multiple collection routes all pooling onto the same line haul, you may have variability on one collection route where you've got increased volume during the day. And then on another, you've got lower volume. Those kind of offset one another and create more stability. It's just like any model anyone's ever run. If you recall basic math, the more you pool, the less variability you see. So you're able to absorb it at a much more cost-effective means. And that's something that I would say we've definitely seen. The other thing I'll mention too, and I know Jacob's going to get a little more into this, so there's kind of a tipping point where, obviously cost is king for every business, particularly in automotive right now, but traditionally where LTL has been heavily leaned upon in certain instances, there is a benefit to leaning more towards a stop off and a collection route, where you get an inventory benefit because of the transit time and things like that. You are expediting those deliveries. So valuing what the cost of the inventory is versus the cost of the transportation is something that we've taken a heavy look at, and something that certainly a cross-dock model allows you to benefit on, because your cost per cube is a lot more efficient in a more full truck, right?
Hopping into kind of visibility to the entire supply chain. So with the cross-dock network adds some additional visibility. We've already mentioned the early detection of problems, but there's also this visibility throughout the entire network. You're not having the relay points, as I mentioned. We have systems in place where as the freight scanned in, you have an extra verification. Those ASNs are being sent directly to our customers, so they're able to see where their freight is at all times. So from pickup to cross-dock, and then if it goes through multiple cross-docks, that visibility to the entire supply chain is provided within this network and with the tools that we have, identifying the ASN issues and able to get that freight to the plant if it's short shipped, as I mentioned, and really being able to see where the truck is at all times. If there's any potential delays, we have some visibility tools so you can see that truck when that freight moves from the inbound to the outbound. You can have full visibility to always know where the freight is, and I think it's important, obviously, for any customer, especially nowadays, to know where their freight's at all times. There's user screens as well, so they can quickly type in an order number and see where that freight is. They don't have to pick up the phone, and it's reduction of emails, reduction of phone calls. And in this day of age where everyone's on their computers, the more you can do to reduce how much communication just for finding an order is, I think, is extremely important. And this has been able to cut down email and phone traffic from our side and really streamline the visibility side and not have to call carriers asking where the freight's at all times.
Yeah, and I think that's a big key as well, Jacob, is the communication. Obviously, we live in a world that loves email, loves IMs, loves all forms of communication. We're almost over inundated, and truly the ability to kind of get early detection, like we mentioned before, and get ahead of issues before they turn into 300 email chains has been a big benefit. The other piece too, I think that's key here is most industries and most companies that are operating direct networks, you're likely not just doing a single driver in a sleeper cab. And a lot of people have moved toward the relay network, which again improves the lead time, but you also kind of get a similar benefit from utilizing the crossdock where you've got a natural stopping point between the freight pickup and then ultimately delivery. And then the benefit it offers over that relay network is obviously the cube utilization improvement at that stop off point. So on top of the visibility that Jacob's mentioning, a lot of that too is really around the improved lead times that you get to. So you're catching issues earlier, and then also you can react quickly because there's that natural relay point in between.
So kind of to segue a little bit from obviously the benefits, we've talked a lot about that, but this is another kind of just to discuss what some of the industry economic challenges are causing and why this is even more important now than ever. As I think most probably are aware, there's a large driver and equipment shortage throughout the industry. There's a lack of drivers out there really for the entire network to support the entire network, and as a result, you've seen increased costs, I think, across the board. With COVID-19 last year, there was a lot of lost revenue for a lot of carriers, and they're trying to make up that lost revenue. At the time, low new truck sales, so there was a backlog on trucks and trailers. There was a lack of southbound volumes and northbound equipment, which was causing that. And really, carriers are starting to be more and more selective. So carriers now have the ability where they may not have had in the past to pick and choose which routes they want to run because there's enough customers out there that need freight moved. Whether it's because of e-commerce nowadays with Amazon shipping freight, there's a lot of demand out there for trucks and trailers. There's not the drivers out there, so carriers are able to pick what works best for them. And it's typically those driver-friendly routes, as we mentioned. It's typically the ones that obviously pay timely, and carriers are able to run multiple routes with their equipment, so they're really selective. And you've seen just a rejection index of over 25% in the last year. And as I mentioned, contract rates are up 10 to 15%, with spot rates running even higher. As we were starting to come out of that, we saw additional issues with the microchip shortages that's hitting this industry and across the board. So we've seen it hasn't really improved where we thought by Q1 2021 we'd be back kind of improving and driver market would be improving. It really hasn't been that case. So we're continuing to see those struggles in the markets with the microchip shortages now and causing shutdowns. And these carriers aren't getting the stability that maybe they weren't before. So now it's definitely affecting the industry. So just to kind of walk through, so we talked a lot about the importance of the network, and this is just kind of segue into how do we get to this network. So network optimization obviously plays a huge impact into that. So being able to run models to understand where the optimal locations are and being able to also incorporate the driver, tractors, and trailers into the optimization is just as important. If you run an optimization just based on purely cost with cost per miles, it may not show the whole picture. But when you're able to actually look at optimization based on the current market, setting what the costs are for the carrier standpoint, and being able to run the optimization really gives you that optimal scenario. You can run multiple scenarios, obviously, with different crosstalks to determine what that throughput would be through each facility, and then really multi-customer as well. When customers are open to sharing freight as well, it allows you to utilize those maybe smaller regions to get that benefit. As I mentioned before, we previously only had a Nashville crossdock, which was a struggle to find carriers in the Southeast. Since we've implemented in Greer and Knoxville, we've seen a significant reduction in cost per mile in those regions because of those local routes, able to hire drivers from those regions in their home every single day. So the network optimization kind of showed that because we were able to compare what our cost per miles would be in the Greer region versus the Nashville region, run a scenario to understand what that cost is and see those benefits of that. The other key tool of the optimization is the output, which is an executable solution. Are the routes feasible? Does it incorporate drivers, hours of service, window times, and what the miles per hour are? And that's what the solution will provide. Is it gives a solution you can optimize and then implement quickly, because you're able to see what that route is going to run, like how many stops are on there, what's the time, what's the miles, and is that feasible for a driver to run? It also optimizes the tractors and trailers, as I mentioned before, the slip seating, so that optimization tool optimizes that as well and considers suppliers' open times, plants' open close times, and then it also balances the routes out through High Junca with window times. So it helps not only from the carrier side, it helps on the supplier and plant side because it's got an even flow of deliveries, even flow of pickups. It's not putting everything on first shift if they're open for 2 shifts. It's balancing those out across their 16 or 24 hours, however long that supplier or plants are open. And it's really just the workflow is, starting with a baseline, defining all the parameters, if there's min frequencies, max frequencies, and then creating that optimization to compare previous state to proposed state. So when we went from that direct network to the optimized network, we saw a lot of benefits, as I mentioned, on the cost side, but also benefits on equipment, on resources. And that's what the optimization is able to tell you is what's the total landed cost, what's the total business case. It's not always about just transportation costs. There's also packaging, there's also inventory. And with the way the network runs, with a lot of the collection routes running in the morning and line hauls running at night, we don't see really those increased lead times that maybe we used to with the cross-dock network, and the connotation that the cross-dock is just going to hold freight. We can set parameters that the freight's only held for 4 hours, and so there's a lot of opportunity to realize what that lead time and inventory impact is.
And I think the key here, as Jacob alluded to, so obviously I think the days of setting a route and letting it run exactly as it's designed, the term of the contractor, are kind of past, right? You have to optimize every linear foot counts, every mile counts. So, as volumes fluctuate and the market fluctuates and all sorts of crazy things are going on, right? Whether they're imposed or just specific to a business, it's so important to continually optimize. And it's also very difficult, as Jacob mentioned, to upset your partners and your network. It's a lot more palatable and easier for your partners and carriers to respond when you're talking about a same day delivery route and the drivers are less impacted, because you may have a marginal route that is the same day delivery, but you add a stop to help get a better cube, and now you push it to an overnight or next day delivery. Those decisions create a lot of disruption, and then the market that Jacob highlighted all the conditions on right now. It's something that we've been ever conscious of at Nissan, of how do we make this friendly for our carriers and help everyone in the supply chain. So we're able to more accurately adapt to our demand changes and supply changes and things like that, with new model launches and things like that, with a cross-dock, because again, the driver's still in the same geographic area. And the stops are changing slightly. So there is some change induced, but it's a lot more palatable for those companies when you keep it close to a same geographic region and they're not driving halfway across the country. So it allows a lot more flexibility on those shorter routes.
Yeah, and to add to Ben's point, I think when I first started doing logistics engineering and route planning, it kind of always was find the lowest cost solution. And it wasn't really, it was more just looking at the data, not really factoring in the external factors. And it was always just trying to find the lowest cost solution. Whereas, as we talk about the evolution and adaptation of the network, it's really been a focus now on our team. And I think the industry is maybe the lowest cost per mile isn't exactly the best solution. It's how can we make the route the most feasible, the most efficient, and then you end up getting those reductions through other avenues, because you're able to build strong relationships with your carriers and have long partners who are willing to run the business, because you're not making those drastic changes, as Ben mentioned, or making those infeasible routes and kind of telling them they need to figure out how to run it. So I think that engineering kind of as a role has changed a lot to where it's more focused on that operational output as well. And that's where this optimization tool helps as well, because it's already factoring that into it. And it's not only looking at costs, looking at feasibility. Is it, how many drivers does it require? How many tractors does it require? As I mentioned before, if you're able to reduce your partner's costs, typically those costs get passed on to you, because they're able to provide you more competitive rates, because you worked with them to help them reduce their costs. And so I think that's definitely been a big change that I've seen, personally as well throughout, my career and working in this industry. And then it just kind of walks through, how do we get to that? So obviously, automotive is heavy on data, having the packaging data and all the demand data. As Ben mentioned, the more accessible the data is, the easier it is to adapt to those varying production volumes and model changes. So the tool is built to have all that data stored in direct feeds from our customers. It's able to develop and build that route plan. And then it takes it all the way from both an optimization to the end data with the end user or the business intelligence. So including the execution side of it, load planning, as well as freight bill audit payment. And then, as I mentioned, the business intelligence side with our live KPIs showing exactly what's happening day to day. So our team is able to see the routes every single day and see what that queue percentage is by route. And so with the collection routes, we have, let's say, 10 drivers that are dispatching every day out of our Detroit cross-dock. We're able to easily maneuver stops because all those suppliers are within a 150-mile radius. So it really gives a lot of flexibility for our engineering teams to do dynamic daily routing, because they're able to see exactly what each supplier is shipping. And if a route's going to cube out because a supplier has a spike in an order, we can quickly move a stop to another route and reduce those unplanned costs, as we mentioned before. We're able to also, because the routes are a lot shorter in nature, if there is an expedite, we're able to dispatch a local driver instead of having to maybe set up an expedite and set up a one-way expedite. We can dispatch a local driver to go to the supplier due to increase in orders. So it's given a lot of flexibility through that. So this just kind of walks through just, all the capabilities and what this network has provided. It makes it a lot quicker and able to adapt at a much quicker pace with that. Louis, that was our last slide, I guess. Do we want to address any questions?
Thank you very
or
much.
Any final comments?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for that presentation. What I particularly liked about it is it was a practical, honest presentation. So it wasn't just the LSP telling us what they thought worked. It was a joint presentation, so we understood a little bit about the background to it all, and the customer reaction and participation in this. So thank you very much. I've got a few questions, and there's been a couple of questions on the Teams page as well. Before I do it, I'm kind of on the subject of Nissan and Venture working closely together. I understand that VGS, Venture Global Solutions, received a supplier award from Nissan. So I'd be interested to know, what the award was and why you won it, why Venture won it. If either of you could take that.
Yeah, for sure. So the award, actually a few months ago, it's derived from actually our purchasing organization, but recognizing VGS as a business partner for really their flexibility and performance were kind of two of the major things being measured. And in a time like, now, unlike any, right, where we've got the most variability and challenges, I think that the industry and really the world has ever seen, having that flexibility was extremely important. So certainly happy to be working with a partner like VGS that is as flexible as they are.
Okay, thank you. One of the subjects that seemed to be strong in the presentation and an important part of the solution was the use of cross docks. So I wanted to explore, why the long milk runs and the relays are good in business today. That's perhaps not how we traditionally understood it to be. And why does this reduce cost?
Yeah, I think, Louis, I'll take part of that. So obviously, I think the bigger piece of it is really the driver and carrier piece, right? So you are essentially creating relay points, natural relay points where you can use a day cab, and you're not keeping a driver away from his or her home, which incurs cost too, because obviously those drivers tend to cost more per mile. The assets cost more to have a sleeper cab. So there's a benefit on the carrier side, creating a natural relay point. So you have one driver running the collection home at night, and then ideally you can pair that with a driver running the line haul portion that also runs the same loop and is at home at night if you get that location, right? So there's a big benefit on the carrier piece, I would say. Yeah,
I agree with Ben's point. It kind of creates another domicile too, as you will, but that's a secure domicile. In the Detroit example, you have now instead of shipping from maybe a plant in Kentucky or Tennessee or Indiana, now you have another location where you can domicile drivers. So you still can technically utilize the relays, but it's more creating those unique domiciles. And it gives you more opportunities for additional carrier base as well, because you're not relying so much on specific relay points or specific domiciles from carriers. So I think when you're able to target some of those larger markets, it really opens up your options as to what carriers can use. So you could actually implement a cross-dock network and still have a bid go out to multiple carriers, and it doesn't really force you into that relationship necessarily with a carrier.
Okay, and a question from a vehicle maker: what volume did you find that the high cube shipping from cross-dock makes sense compared to milk runs directly from suppliers? What was the crossover point there?
I think the traditional college answer is it depends, right? So it really does depend on location and the market conditions in that location. So obviously there are regions in the US and then regions globally that are more expensive. So every cube is much more valuable. And then there's also the factor to consider, way out versus cube out. So it may not be necessarily just a M3 or linear foot problem. It may actually be a weight problem. And one of the things we didn't necessarily address before that I do think is worth noting, on running a direct milk run, you may have a cluster of suppliers that are just really heavy in the region, right? And you weigh that load out and you've got a lot of space left on it. But because of geography, it's prohibitively expensive to essentially run longer runs and cube it out and create a good mix of suppliers. So I think that's something certainly to consider is the weight piece. So we're able to now mix heavy suppliers with lighter suppliers and maximize the cube of a load. So again, not directly answering the question. I don't know if there's necessarily a tipping point, but it really depends on some of the market conditions and then the composition of the freight, whether it's heavy material, whether it's high cube material. We kind of treat every situation separately. It's a tough one to say, but really factoring all those things in. Yeah. And Jacob, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I can just from our side, especially on the optimization side, when we typically run a scenario, when we look at a direct milk run route, we have a milk run factor that's considered, and it's typically 3 to 4% that we're decreasing for every additional stop that's added on the milk run side due to suppliers not stacking on top of each other, inefficient maybe packaging or just only ordering one pallet. So as you add stops, you can imagine if you had 5 stops, we're planning for about 15 to 20% of error because we're losing those inefficiencies. Whereas on the cross-dock network and the line hauls, we're planning those to 95 to 100% full because we're expecting the cross-dock to be able to stack the freight that's able to stack by and like freight and really kind of play that jigsaw puzzle and make the trailer fit as efficiently and safely as possible. There's also opportunities with cross docks for decking to even further improve that utilization with utilizing the decking to stack on like freight. So you can really get that maximum utilization out of the trailer. So I'd say we've seen, I'd say across the industry, maybe 10 to 15% improvement on line hauls, especially from the direct milk runs. On the collection routes, you may not see that improvement anymore because you're obviously picking up 8 suppliers, but because the collection routes are typically so much closer to the cross dock, we're okay losing a little bit of utilization on the short haul routes as long as we're regaining that on the long haul routes. So if it takes us 6 trucks to run the collection routes, but only 5 trucks to run the line haul, we'd rather do that obviously at the shorter distance and then consolidate that freight and eliminate one of the line haul routes. Okay.
So obviously misunderstood a bit that part of the presentation. So the long relays and the collection routes are not necessarily the good thing. It's the cross docks that are the solution there. And on the subject of cross docks, who should choose? I've seen different car makers use different versions or ways of doing this. Who should choose a location of the cross dock ideally? Should it be the car maker actually saying this is where we want the cross docks, or should it be the logistics company providing the answer and saying this is where we believe, or we've already got cross docks and this is where you could find the best efficiencies?
Yeah, I think it's tough to say, Louis. I think it really depends on the openness to commingling freight, right? So, if I'm just looking at a dedicated model, perhaps, I as the OEM can suggest a better option for where my supplier base is. But particularly if you look at a shared model where you're not just picking up my freight, Nissan's freight today, you're incorporating it with other customers, it's going to be very difficult for me to tell you where an optimal location is because I'm not going to know those savings opportunities, right? So it really depends on how open you are to that kind of shared model of transportation. And in that case, I would say a logistics service provider is going to have a little more insight on some of those things.
Mm-hmm. And we see car makers and others changing from being vehicle makers to mobility companies and so on. I've seen some of the solutions that you mentioned there, the optimization and the TMS role, the role that TMS played in this solution. Is it time for, can you give us a little bit more information on how the technology played a role? And is it time for transportations to stop being transportation companies and becoming more tech companies?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think definitely technology plays a huge part of it, obviously. I think from the visibility standpoint, being able to see where the freight's at all times, and then just the foresight to know what the freight's how much freight we're going to be shipping on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. And that's without all that data inputs into a system. It could be done, but not maybe as dynamically and as quickly as we now want it to be. With production changes happening weekly or daily at this point, you really need to be able to adapt as quickly as possible. And so having that technology in place to see what the percentages are, what the weight's going to be, it really provides, the team members the tools they need to be successful in that. And in this day and age, everyone wants to see, live data, live KPIs, and what was my cost yesterday, what was my cost last week. So being able to incorporate not only just the cube and the percentages is what's our cost, and being able to see that so you can understand if I work a Saturday or Sunday production, what was my cost for working that? If I only run 4 or 5 days, and being able to quickly analyze what the cost impact is, not just on the transportation network, but overall to see. And you can really help make decisions on it can help production make decisions on what that cost threshold is for when you're changing routes around. And if you increase one vehicle model by 10% and decrease another by 10%, what is that cost impact? And really having all of that data and tools is really, I think, how you can provide that and see that on as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And then I think you mentioned, is it a transportation or technology? I think it's kind of moving in itself away from transportation. And as we've kind of talked about today, it's a mix of both. Obviously, the carriers are ever important, but how can, with the network, the market conditions that we talked about earlier, with driver shortages, how can we offset that? And I think technology is a way to do that, because you're able to look at multi-customer networks. You're able to look at data, as I mentioned, and reduce the number of trucks. If we can reduce how many trucks and trailers are needed, in turn, we can help offset some of those market conditions that are hurting us today with the shortages. And I think being able to kind of understand the data from a better aspect is a quick and easy way to help offset some of those market conditions.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, is that a differentiator for you when you're choosing suppliers? Is the tech side the most important point now?
I mean, I would say cost is always king, right? So you can't get away from that, right? But I think you become cost competitive when you focus on improvement and Kaizen opportunities. So technology is an opportunity to do that. And I would say certainly, it's something that we look at in our assessment process all the time. So we're looking at cost, but we're also very closely looking at the technology piece, whether it's a cross-dock provider, whether it's a carrier, whether it's a logistics provider. All those things come to play, and technology is going to be able to make a company, in my opinion, a lot more competitive on the cost side, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. A question from another vehicle maker now is, how is the service paid? Is it by cubic meters, by mile, by truck?
So I don't know that we can necessarily answer that piece. That's kind of a commercially sensitive topic, but it can vary for sure.
Yeah. I'd say there's with this type of model, there's multiple pricing options that you can look at it. Whether it, as you mentioned, whether it's per cubic meter, per cubic foot, cost per hundredweight, cost per pallet. There's multiple different ways to charge that transportation. I mentioned earlier, there's dedicated operations as well, where you can pay for tractors and trailers. So across the board, we probably, from our side with multiple customers, have used every type of pricing vehicle there is. And it's adaptable to what the customer wants. And I think that's the importance, is being flexible and being able to adapt to the customer's needs.
And an important area recently with conversations I've had with different vehicle makers is the cost and importance of packaging. How important was packaging, the use, what kind of packaging, the management of the packaging? How much of a role did that play in making these decisions and finding the solutions?
I would say maybe not as much as it should have initially. So it's certainly something that we see as a challenge in the market in general, is making sure that when you've got returnable dunnage and returnable packaging, that it stays in the loop and gets its useful life to the expected time period that you've purchased it for. As I mentioned before, one of the benefits I think that we've had, or that we've seen from having a warehouse and a cross dock as an intermediary, is we're able to more effectively root cause some of those issues that previously on a direct load we may not have had before, because of just the resources that are put behind it. So you can get a picture when it hits that dock of how it came in from the supplier, and there's resources dedicated to it. And when you're talking about the amount of volume that we're dealing with, it may not be as feasible when you get to a final plant destination. So it's certainly been a big benefit in tracking those issues down. And then, again, it's a leading indicator, because once you start seeing cardboard come in, there's something going on that's leading to that, if you're expecting, plastic tote or something like that. So we've got those leading indicators where we can get to the root cause of it and address it more quickly. And then again, like I admitted before, truthfully, it wasn't something we were even factoring in as a primary decision metric, but something we've certainly seen a benefit on.
Yeah, and I would add to that part of the, designing of the routes as well incorporates that as well too. So how can we reduce the dwell on the packaging? As I mentioned before, if we collect all the routes by, let's say, 4 p.m., can we get that freight moved by 8 p.m. or 10 p.m. same day to reduce that transit, which in turn will help improve your packaging? And then another item I would say is too, with let's say there's production increases and now the packaging is causing cube outs on your outbound dunnage routes. With the garbage can method of the cross docks, it actually gives you an opportunity to kind of dump all that dunnage, get it to the closest point to the supplier, so you can return that packaging actually quicker and at a reduced cost, because instead of having to load 2 trailers of the same supplier in one day, now you can meter it out through your 4, 5, 6 line haul to the cross dock, and they can help you by either setting up a local truck or metering it out themselves from the facility as well. So I think from a dunnage and packaging expedite cost, I think you see reduced costs on that side as well.
Okay. And a final question, because I think our time might be up now. Actually, no, there's another question coming again. Sorry, do you use cross docks for return empty container management in addition to optimizing the loads?
Yes. Similar to like a direct milk run, right? So in the direct method, I think Jacob mentioned, you've got footprints allocated for dunnage, and as suppliers load their freight, they take their dunnage off, reload dunnage for further stops down the line. Similar model with the cross dock, right? You're not giving up that same trip for dunnage, but to Jacob's point, you're able to, at least on the leg from the plant to the cross dock, cube that trailer as full as you can with really no regard for stop order or any of that. And so in a way, you're reducing the required inbound and outbound dunnage loads by being able to just pack that full to the cross dock and then have them meter it out. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then now the final question is, how important was how you worked together, an open relationship, or was it kind of strictly, spreadsheets or algorithms and things like that? Or was it about having an open relationship where you could really share ideas and so on?
I mean, I would say absolutely, for sure. I think we challenge each other, like, Nissan VGS, we challenge a lot on optimal solutions, right? Because we're trying to get to the same thing, which is the best solution overall. But certainly I would say one of the amazing pieces of this, whole pandemic globally is we've made network changes and all sorts of volume adjustments, and like many automakers had a period of no production. Through all of that, we've been able to do a lot of it digitally, and so not digitally just with email and spreadsheets, but also Zoom meetings like what we're doing right now. And really working through those challenges as they occur. So I would say, just in general speaking, like, I think having the data is great, but if you're not communicating it effectively, then what's that worth?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with Ben. Obviously, you can send Excel spreadsheets back and forth, but having that communication and continued dialogues with, whether it's Nissan or other customers is just as important, because there's things that you may not see just from looking at spreadsheets and emails and stuff like that. So, we appreciate, Nissan having calls with us and just kind of walking through ideas, and sometimes just bouncing ideas off each other that may be completely crazy or out of the box, but they're open to those, and they're typically, willing to at least listen to us and determine whether it's a good idea or not. So I think just having those open communications and dialogue and close relationship is extremely important to be able to continue, growing and reducing cost and improving throughout the, our partnership.
Okay, thank you. Well, on that note, I'd like to thank Jacob from Venture Global Solutions and Ben from Nissan for what I hope and think or believe was a very interesting presentation there. We have recorded it, so we will be sharing the recording as well. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much, everyone, for being a part of this. And we look forward to being in contact with you all again. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lou. Thanks, Ben.